Welcome to Tech Matters, sharing our vast business and development experience with developers like you. Here are your hosts, Stephen Feather and Patrick Shetta.
So you've decided you need a product. How do you suss out the ideas, features, and requirements that lead you to your MVP?
I think this would be an excellent episode to talk about the concept of ideation.
That's a new word. What does ideation mean?
Right, and that's not necessarily a vocabulary word that a lot of people have. So in general, it means generating new concepts or ideas for you to move on and perhaps create a new app. I think that it is a portmanteau of the words idea generation or idea creation, and thus make the word ideation. That's how I like to think of it.
For those that don't know what portmanteau is, I had to go look it up too. It's jamming two words together so that you come up with a new word. So like if you have a motor hotel, now we have this new concept of motel. All right, good.
Exactly.
Okay. So are we basically talking about a bunch of guys sitting in a room, or have I jumped too far down the line?
Well, it could be.
Okay.
I think that first I'd like to just kind of give a general vibe of what the whole thing is. So I like to think of it as a very creative process, perhaps the same process that a musician or an artist would use to become inspired or to become motivated. I remember one time I was speaking with Jim Peterick, who is a famous songwriter. Look him up. He's wrote a few songs that you know. And he was playing a new song just on his acoustic guitar, kind of saying, hey, check out this new song I wrote. And he was saying the motivation for it, you would never guess how I got inspired for this. And it was a love song or something. I don't specifically remember. But he says, one day, I was helping out with chores and I was vacuuming and I turned off the vacuum and I put it down and I went and wrote the song. His inspiration came from something totally unrelated to what he wasn't even trying to write it. He was just doing something every day. And that's how a lot of artist type people become inspired, is they'll just go for a walk. They'll go turn their brain off and go watch a TV show maybe that they never watch or something. Just kind of turn it off and let your background threads in your brain just come up with it on your own. So I like to think of idea discovery in the creative way kind of happens like that. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind and acknowledge and respect that is a possibility to help you come up with ideas, rather than we will not leave this table until we have the idea. That's absolutely the wrong way to do it.
If there's any way to keep your brain from working, is to put a timetable in place.
Yes.
Seems to be.
Yes.
And as a side thing, one of the reasons a lot of us carry around notebooks and pens or a digital recorder is so that we can always be capturing those ideas. So what's the next step? So we know we're in this zone that we need something. We also realize that we probably do need to interact with some other people. When you're sitting with a client, what's your next step?
Right. So there's one thing to also acknowledge too, that there's a difference between, me and my buddy. I said, hey, there's a hackathon. Let's go to the hackathon. And what's the idea? I don't know. We'll think of it when we get there. To me, that's not ideation. That's winging it, and you'll probably come up with something cool. But it's not necessarily a business app that will succeed and will help your business. Planning in the real world with real businesses doesn't really happen that way. You have to involve people who are the product owners, the managers, people who understand the business, people who understand the customers, what they need. Perhaps if you're doing an enterprise app, it's something for employees. What are their pain points? The stakeholders. Basically, you need to understand everything about your domain that will help you create something that will be successful for your business. So my point is, there is a differentiation between, hey, we're going to go sit at the coffee shop and we're going to ideate and come up with something, and we're going to submit to a hackathon and we're going to, be billionaires, versus slow it down a bit, logically think, and go through a more strict process and come out with a business success.
Where in some of the enterprises, and we'll talk about enterprise later, they'll have internal hackathons, but one of the constraints that's already in place is those folks who are inside the enterprise are already product owners, developers. They understand the customers because they've been exposed to it. All right. So what would be the next thing we do? We need to understand the culture, maybe walk through let's say we observe a product or a problem, and we say, how do we get to better understand all the players that surround this particular problem? Taxis. Nobody likes taking a taxi. So Uber comes up with the idea, we can get rid of taxis. How many players are in the middle of that we have to look at all of the different scenarios.
Right. And an excellent way, taxi driver is an excellent example of figuring out what someone needs is to do what you might call a day in the life. And in fact, that is what it's called. You do a day in the life analysis of the people who are going to be using your app. So what does that mean? You shadow them. So if you're a taxi driver and you're saying, I need to figure out what this guy needs and his pain points and what will make his job more efficient, you need to understand his job. So I know I've ridden in taxis and Ubers, but I would by no means say that I understand this guy's day and how he operates and goes through his day and how he starts his day and when he figures out where to go and all the things involved. I personally don't know how that works. But if I do the shadowing of him and ride along with him, and I can observe and take notes and be very aware of everything he's doing, then you can figure out, even if he doesn't even realize some inefficiencies, you can spot them having these fresh eyes on it. So day in the life, shadowing someone absolutely is useful. You can gather detailed observations. You can see inefficiencies. Is their process working for them, for their customers, for the business that they represent? Are they losing data that you could possibly be capturing and use in a better way? Not even just analytics, but maybe if they just capture one piece of data about a customer, you capture that data for all customers, and you have a whole new reveal of things to make your business better. So there's things like that. Employee performance, if you're in an enterprise, if you're writing an enterprise app that would be internal to the company, you really need to understand how that employee works and how they do their job and exactly the things that they're doing inefficiently and that they can do better.
Thinking about Uber, if you were looking at two different markets, let's say we're looking at the Atlanta market and New York City. As a consumer, I really don't have a pain point that requires Uber when I'm in New York City. I can walk up to the curb, I raise my hand, and one of a million yellow cabs drives by and one stops and picks me up and takes me where I'm supposed to go. And I've never had a bad experience hailing a cab in New York. Atlanta's a different story because we don't have as many cabs. Our streets are different, and Uber does seem to work a little better here or be more likely to be used. So we're talking about not just looking at one particular small market, but does your idea stretch across multiple days in the lives of different people? Because a New Yorker is not going to look and say, yep, this is the best thing since sliced bread, but somebody in a smaller area may look at it that way.
Absolutely.
Okay. I like the idea of gathering data. One of the things, if using Uber as an example, one of the things that you don't get from a yellow cab is a continued relationship with that customer. And how do you as a cabbie, if you don't give them a card, say, hey, if you need a pickup at 3 a.m, call me, I'm still on duty. And I've had that happen. And sometimes when I've been in New York, I've had a cabbie that I've called on a regular basis to come pick me up, which is a little different than most folks experience. But it's nice to know the same person over and over. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a need for Uber in New York. All right. What's the next step?
I think along with knowing how someone does their job, sometimes there are UX features for an app that are inherent to the job. So you don't want inefficiencies in your app. So if you are in some service organization that perhaps they have to enter some data in or something like that, you're in the service organization, you're there to do servicing. You don't want to be spending a whole lot of time on your app. And I've seen it just very recently, some service at my house. The guy's going back and forth and swiping, and I don't know how to use this app. I've heard him say that so many times. So UX features inherent to the job are extremely important to discover.
So let's come up with an app. My toilets are clogged. They're not really. Toilets are clogged. So the first thing I think is I'm going to go on Google Play and I'm going to open it up and I'm going to look for a plumber app. And I mean, that doesn't seem realistic to me. The old days it was open up the phone book, find the first person who answers the phone and say, come unclog my toilet. But apparently now you can get Mr. Rooter 911. But I had to take the time to go look that up. Now, toilet problem's a little different than if I have streaming water all over my house. At that point, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to my phone. So maybe in certain circumstances, we have to say, no, that is absolutely not the right area for us to put out a consumer app. But maybe we can reduce paperwork and be more efficient from the other end. So let's look at this one from the point of view of I'm the plumber and I show up at your house, or I've gotten an app and the app says, I want you to go to this address. This is the problem. And we start from that point of view. So there isn't always an app solution for everybody or for every side of a problem, but maybe there is for the service provider.
Right. Totally agree with that.
Okay. So we're looking at paperwork reduction, routing, data entry, more accurate data entry. That's probably a big one. If I'm sitting there taking notes and the papers get wet, of course, if my smartphone gets wet, that's probably not a great thing either. What else could we look at if we were a plumber? Well,
you could also look at from the company tracking the person's schedule and vehicle and thing like that. I called for the service to come to my house, and they said, we're going to show up between 12 and 6. Well, it was 10 minutes to 12. I figured I had some time to run out. I think I went for a jog or something. And at the end of 1 mile, I look at my phone and I have a message that says the technician's on their way. And, for them, that was the best scenario to route them to me. So I responded back and said, I'm not home. Can you give me another hour? And they said, okay. So they, I assume, routed them to the next most efficient way to get to me. And I didn't even care if I got 4 people in front of me, as long as it worked better for them and I got the person there. Right. But they could certainly do something like that, very smart route planning, so that, we live in an area where driving, across town can be 20 minutes. So if they're driving, half an hour to one and then back to mine, well, if he's driving a half an hour the opposite direction, he can hit a couple other ones and then get back to mine. So from the company point of view, route planning, technician tracking, live technician tracking would certainly be something
beneficial to them and beneficial to you as a consumer as well, because you weren't available now, but will be available later.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never understood the 4-6 hour window thing. I mean, I understand as a planner that you're blocking 3 slots a day or 2 slots a day, but from a consumer point of view, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. Absolutely. Parts, that's a big one. We know that you need a water heater replaced. We already have photos of what it looks like, so I know what I'm getting into when I show up as a plumber, and I need to check and make sure I've got what I need on the truck, so to speak.
And that would work really well, especially if you're a repeat customer and they have data about your specific unit and model number, year it was installed, and you have this thing, whatever you're getting fixed, and it's 5 years old, and you're reporting a problem, they can say, I know what's going on. Every 5 years, this happens to this model, or something like that. If possible, then they could know ahead of time things to bring.
Actually, here we have that. When the house was originally built that I live in, one of the problems was they didn't require expansion, either blowout valves or expansion tanks. So when pressure comes from the city, it would blow up water tanks. That's a bit of a concern because it can take people with them. If you've ever watched the YouTube videos, water under pressure does amazing things inside of a 50-gallon water tank. And so when they were coming out, they said, do you have an expansion tank? I said, no. And they said, do you have room to put one in? I said, I'm pretty sure we don't have room to put one in. It's in a little closet next to the laundry room. And so they said, can you send us a picture of what it looks like? And so before they had gotten here, the guy had already drawn up a design of what he was going to put in. So instead of an expansion tank, we have a series of valves that blow out to the outside. But that was very convenient because he didn't have to spend a whole lot of time here trying to jury rig something, and he could bring all of the parts that he needed to replace and get it working for us. So that was a very cool use of technology there. So we've got an idea, and what's the next thing? I mean, we can't just go to market with this yet. We just have ideas. We've bounced stuff around, wrote it down on paper.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that while you're in the ideation phase, you're not just going right to market. You still have to respect the whole process that we've been talking about and will continue to talk about, rapid cycles and things like that. But you have to do your market analysis. So it's really wonderful if you're an internal enterprise app and all the people who are affected are there and can and bring up issues. But if you're doing something for the consumer and you're like, yes, this is a great idea, you really have to run it by the market. If you've done a day in the life, then you probably have that information already, but you don't always get to do that. So ideation phase, you still have to do market analysis, analytics if it's appropriate at that point, but you still have to do that step. You can't skip it.
and that would apply to whether we're sitting in enterprise or small company. Either way, you need to figure out if there's value to what we're planning on doing. Part of that value comes from deciding how rich the feature set is. So through the ideation process, through the day in the life, next step to sit and create a feature list?
Yes. So you kind of need to come up with the definition of what your features are. You need to make sure that they're leading you to a good reference point of a minimum viable product.
Okay.
Rather than, wouldn't it be great if we put this on the app? No, you can't do that. You have to still think within your bounded process. I mean, whether you're doing agile or however you want to describe it, you still have a process you're following for maximum efficiency and minimum dollar waste. And part of that is getting to the minimum viable product. So you have to continue with, I think we've discussed it before, is what features can you possibly include now. You have to evaluate which features, what's the value and what's the weight of including these features, and perhaps those will be phase 3, and we still have to get through phase 1 yet. So they're definitely, feature discovery is part of the plan.
Okay. And if I'm in an enterprise, I have a better understanding of the big money picture and the value for some of those features than if I'm a startup. Probably have more data to fall back on there.
Yeah, definitely. Enterprise is definitely has some different process that you can do rather than apps for plumbers. Enterprise has a whole different thing that we can discuss on how to do the ideation.
An enterprise they're already very organized, very bureaucratic, set in, this is the way we kind of work, not exactly agile very much. We have a standard process. So let's talk, as we finish up today, let's walk through what that would look like, because we've kind of bounced around ideas if we were sitting with a new idea. But let's say we're an enterprise and we're trying to move into a new market or adjust a market or become more relevant in the market that we're in. What would that look like for an enterprise? Where would you start?
I love enterprise ideation. I've been involved with it a few times, and it's very, very process. I don't want to say restricted, but very process oriented to get you where you want to go. So although I would not say that it's objective, but the way that you go through these subjective analysis, you kind of can come up to objective decisions based upon everyone's input, and it works pretty well. I think that your first step is you really need to kick off the process with you decide the people that you need in place. You get a whole bunch of paper, you get a whole bunch of people, you get Post-it flip charts, you get Post-it notes, and you basically have to create kind of a working whiteboardish ideation board to figure out, and it very much is a brainstorming process where people are going to throw out ideas. You're going to have people from different business units. So, for example, if you're a large retailer and you're saying we need to improve maybe some of our internal apps or introduce a new internal app, you need to have a whole bunch of people there who are vying for the award of getting the new app. So perhaps your shipping department doesn't necessarily need an app, and your human resources processing does need an app. They all need to be there and have the discussion. And maybe what I just said is absolutely wrong for a particular business. I'm assuming they don't need it, but they might be the one having the most trouble. So I as the expert in that discussion, could be totally wrong. And that's why you get all these people together and you get this whole process and you figure it out. So the way you would do it would be put up some Post-it boards, Post-it notes, and you can have different axes, like an X and Y axis on your big grid, basically. And on one of the axes you would put maybe the roles of people. So sales reps, plant manager, things like that. Roles in the company, and you'd put them down one axis. Either way, it doesn't matter, but you put them on one axis. And then on the other axis, you put business drivers. So, number one, reduce costs, revenue growth, customer satisfaction, put those along another axis. And then you lay out the importance for those business drivers based upon these business roles, and you have everyone in the room kind of helped decide where the intersections happen. Well, we have to put one there, and then we have a whole bunch of people say this is very important to put right here. So what ends up happening is, you step back from your ideation board, and what you see is there's some hot spots, there's some clusters of, we have revenue growth that in the sales reps is extremely important for us, for example. Cost reduction for the plant managers is very important. And you'll see, so cost reduction with your sales reps, that box might be totally empty.
Usually is, yeah.
Something like that. So,
that was a total generalization. Don't judge us on that one, but you're right.
So you step back and you look at the hot spots, and those are your candidates for, these are the apps that we need to focus on. So perhaps there's, 25 to 100 different things that could be, but the hotspots, there's like 4 hotspots on here. And then, so now you've kind of objectively decided these are where we should focus. So now you're really down to these 4 decisions, and then the decision making becomes way easier than 100 apps we could possibly build versus 4. And then you can, introduce cost to make this app, and how long would it take, and which apps, could be done quicker, and resources and all that stuff. And there's a different thinking of once you get down to the hot spots of how you decide that. But that's hugely beneficial to come up with ideas for your apps.
Okay. If there was one last thing you wanted to say to somebody who's thinking about setting up ideation, what would that be? I know that was a question out of the blue.
I think that embrace the creative process. like I talked about. I come from a background, an artistic background in music. And I absolutely, a long time ago, embraced the creative process where I'm going to step away. And I've even worked in an office that was in a high rise in downtown Chicago. And every once in a while, I'd just stand up from my desk and go stand and stare out the window. And everyone would be like, what's the guy doing? What he's doing is coming up with the next best idea of how to make this code work better, although it doesn't look like that. So embrace the creative process. Don't feel like you're stuck. Okay, we've scheduled this meeting for 10 o'clock, very enterprisey. Schedule it for 10 o'clock. Lunch is coming in at noon. And by 1 o'clock, we better have the ideas or you're all in trouble, or you won't get your bonuses. A huge enterprise motivation is bonuses. That's absolutely the wrong way to think of it. So embrace the creative process. Don't restrict yourself to the timeline. Obviously, the timelines are involved. You can't go for 6 months. But if you're like, here we are, here's part of our one day, we have to be done, you're going to fail. And you also need to think of it in a bigger way rather than the guys at the hackathon. Oh, let's just do this, and here's how we can dethrone Facebook. It'll be great. No. You don't think like that. You think in a business sense, and how do we make money, and how do we come up with our next best idea to help our business grow.
Excellent. Adding on to that, I would kind of suggest that enterprises hiring a consultant to come in from the outside to break apart the structure and say, we're not going to be stuck with 2 hours. We're going to take as much time as it needs, and I'm going to help facilitate that is a big plus. Has a huge advantage to bring a consultant into an enterprise or a startup, somebody else with a different way of thinking.
I hugely agree with that. I think that if you have long-timers at an enterprise, everyone's kind of stuck in their roles, their day-to-day, and you're going to get the pushback of, the consulting companies coming in, who are these hot shots, high-paid, blah, blah, blah. These are the guys who are actually going to help you. You have to respect that they are the experts. They are working efficiently to help you come up with ideas and help you make money, and respect them, give them your time, give them your, open yourself to them, and good things will happen.
Absolutely. And those are our thoughts on ideation. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you for joining.